All right, let's dive into something I think we all kind of just accept without really thinking about it too much. Monogamy.
Yeah.
The whole one person for life thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, is it really as simple as just choosing to be with one person?
Right. Is that the whole story? I mean,
No.
we're not here to judge anyone's relationship choices, but
Of course not.
we do want to understand how this whole monogamy thing became the norm in the first place
Yeah,
and maybe uncover some stuff we haven't really thought about before.
absolutely. And we have this really fascinating academic article called Compulsory Monogamy and Polyamorous Existence.
Oh, interesting, Ty.
I know, right?
Okay.
It really digs deep into all of this. And I think even if you're like happily monogamous,
Ah.
this deep dive might just make you think about things a bit differently.
Okay, so how does this article frame monogamy? Is it really just a personal choice?
Well, right off the bat, they use this term compulsory monogamy.
Impulse.
It's pretty strong. It suggests that we're almost being forced into this one relationship model, whether we realize it or not.
Okay, that's pretty intense. I mean, forced is a strong word. Where is this pressure coming from? Give us some examples.
Oh, it's everywhere. Think about religion, right? Many religions have really strict rules about monogamy, like it's the only acceptable way to be in a relationship.
That's true. And it's not just religion. Isn't the law also set up to kind of favor monogamous relationships?
Totally. Like marriage, legally speaking,
Yeah.
it's basically built around this idea of two people and no one else. And the article even talks about how some laws, like the ones about adultery, can actually be traced back to this idea that monogamy is the only way to go, the enforced norm.
Whoa, I never really thought about it like that. It's like the law itself is upholding this one particular relationship model.
Right. And it goes even deeper. Like, think about psychology as a field. Historically, it's often presented monogamy as the healthiest, most fulfilling type of relationship.
So even when we're looking for relationship advice, we
Exactly.
might be getting information that's already biased toward this monogamy idea.
And we can't forget about pop culture, right? All those romantic
Oh,
comedies,
yeah? Totally.
fairy tales, those stories we've been told since we were kids about finding the one and living happily ever after.
Yeah, like it's the only happy ending.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, are we really choosing monogamy freely? Or are we just playing out these scripts that have been, like, ingrained in our minds?
You know what? I've never really stopped to think about how all of these cultural messages might be shaping how we view relationships.
And that's exactly what this article is trying to make us do. It's not about saying monogamy is wrong.
Right.
It's about helping us understand why we think the way we do about it.
Okay, that's super interesting. So we might not be looking at this whole monogamy thing with fresh eyes.
Yeah, and the article has this term for it, mononormativity.
Mononormativity.
It's like this underlying assumption that monogamy is the default, the normal, and it's the only way to have a real relationship. But there's more. The article takes it a step further and links mononormativity to traditional gender roles and like power dynamics too.
Okay, wait. Gender roles? I don't really see how those fit in here.
So get this, even someone like Freud,
Freud, like the famous psychologist.
yep, him, early on he actually saw monogamy as kind of oppressive, especially for women.
Oh, really?
Hmm.
Huh, that's interesting.
But then, as his ideas got more popular, his views kind of shifted to be more in line with what society at the time considered normal.
Oh, wow. So are you saying that even someone like Freud, who was all about understanding the complexities of human desire, was still influenced by the prevailing norms about monogamy?
Yeah, basically. And the article uses that to show just how deeply ingrained this whole mononormativity thing is. Like, even the people studying relationships aren't immune to the pressures of their culture?
I'm starting to see how all these pieces connect now. It's like there's this whole hidden layer of expectations and assumptions that we've never really questioned.
Exactly. And that brings us to this really interesting question. How does this mononormativity thing connect to power dynamics between men and women? Because that's where things start to get really compulsory, if you know what I mean.
All right, definitely ready to dig into that. But before we do, let's just recap what we've talked about so far. We're looking at this idea that monogamy isn't just a personal choice, but something that's been deeply ingrained in our culture through things like religion, law, psychology, and even those romantic comedies we all love.
Right, and this assumption, this mononormativity,
Uh-huh.
often goes unnoticed, but it has real-life consequences for how we view relationships and even how we interact with each other.
Exactly. And now we're about to explore how it can even affect the power dynamics between men and women.
So how does this mononormativity thing play out when it comes to, like, the power dynamics between men and women?
Give us an example.
Okay, so the article talks a lot about the double standard, right?
Like how men and women are judged differently for basically doing the same thing.
Exactly. Think about it. A man who dates a lot of people might be called a player,
Right?
but it's almost like a badge of honor, you know?
Yeah. There's that kind of admiration there, like, oh, he's a player.
But when a woman does the same thing,
It's totally different.
it's not seen the same way at all.
She's judged, right?
Big time. She might be called all sorts of names,
Hmm.
seen as less desirable for a serious relationship.
Mhm.
People might even avoid her.
It's so unfair.
And it all ties back to this mononormative thinking. Like, a woman's sexuality is seen as something to be controlled, you know, especially within marriage.
It's like a man's worth is somehow separate from his sexual history, but a woman's is completely intertwined with it.
Yeah, and the article points out that this actually goes way back. Like, historically, women were seen as property, first belonging to their fathers and then to their husbands.
Wow, I never thought about it that way.
And monogamy in that context, it was a way to make sure a man knew his kids were actually his and to keep that bloodline pure, you know?
So it's not just about love and commitment. It's about power and control.
That's a big part of it, yeah. And it's not just a social thing. Like, the legal system often reinforces these double standards too.
We talked about the adultery laws earlier, but are there any other examples?
Yeah, like the provocation defense, you know, where a man kills his wife after he finds out she cheated on him.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Well, sometimes he'll get a lighter sentence than if he killed her for a different reason.
Oh, wow.
It's messed up, right?
It's like saying that a woman's infidelity is a better excuse for violence than any other reason. It's disturbing.
Exactly. It really shows how deep those power imbalances run, even in systems that are supposed to be, like, totally fair and neutral.
So we've talked about how this whole mononormativity thing can really affect how men and women are treated differently and even perpetuate a system where women are at a disadvantage.
Yep.
But the article doesn't just critique monogamy.
Right.
It also looks at different ways of doing relationships, like polyamory.
Yeah. They talk about how polyamory can help us understand all the assumptions we make about relationships in general.
That makes sense. So for people who might not be familiar with polyamory, can you just quickly explain what it is?
Sure. Basically, polyamory is about having multiple romantic relationships, but everyone knows about it
Okay.
and everyone agrees to it. It's all about honesty and communication.
So it's more than just an open relationship.
Right. Open relationships can look a lot of different ways, but polyamory is very specific.
Got
It's
it.
about being ethical and transparent about having multiple partners.
So the article suggests that polyamory, in particular, can actually be empowering for women.
Yeah, it talks about how it can challenge that double standard we were just talking about. You know, by choosing to have multiple relationships, women in polyamorous relationships can kind of take control of their own narrative, you know?
They're rejecting the idea that their worth is tied to being with only one man,
Exactly.
or that their sexual history somehow defines them.
And polyamory also often forces people to really confront those feelings of jealousy.
Yeah, jealousy can be a tough one.
But instead of seeing it as a reason to, like, control your partner,
Right, right.
you learn to work through it, talk it out.
So even if someone's not into the whole polyamory thing, are there things we can learn from that way of thinking about relationships?
Totally. The article talks about adopting a polyamorous mindset, even if you're in a monogamous relationship.
Oh, interesting. So what does that mean exactly?
It's about being more intentional, more communicative,
Okay.
and really paying attention to how power dynamics are playing out, you know?
So it's not about the number of partners. It's about bringing that same honesty and openness to all your relationships.
Right. And the article calls this a polyamorous existence.
Polyamorous existence. I like that.
It's about moving away from those old, rigid expectations and creating relationships that actually work for everyone.
This is making me rethink so many things. It's like we're expanding our definition of what a healthy relationship can even look like.
And the article goes even further.
Really?
It suggests this shift in thinking can benefit not just romantic relationships,
Okay.
but also your friendships, your family relationships, even your relationship with yourself.
Wait, what? My relationship with myself? How does that even work?
Well, think about it. Mononormativity often teaches us to put our romantic partner above everything else, right?
Yeah, like they're the most important
Like
thing.
you're supposed to kind of merge into one unit.
Become a we.
Exactly. But the article argues that can actually be really bad for you.
Oh, how so?
It can lead to codependency, resentment.
Mhm.
You can even lose yourself in the process.
So a polyamorous existence when it comes to yourself
Yeah.
would be like taking care of your own needs, setting boundaries.
Exactly. It's about remembering that a healthy relationship means both people are still individuals, you know? They can thrive on their own while still being connected and supportive of each other.
This whole conversation is blowing my mind. We started by questioning monogamy, and now we're rethinking how we approach all our relationships.
I know. It's amazing what happens when you start digging deeper, right?
So this is where they bring in this idea of the polyamorous continuum.
Yes. And it's such a cool concept.
I'm curious to hear more about that. So tell me more about this polyamorous continuum.
Okay. So it's like this.
Ah.
Instead of thinking about relationships as just monogamous or polyamorous.
Right, like those are the only options.
Exactly. The continuum shows that there's actually a whole range of possibilities in between.
So it's not just black and white.
It's more like a spectrum, you
Yeah.
know? You could
Yeah.
have monogamy on one end and polyamory on the other.
And in between those two,
Yeah.
there are all sorts of different ways people could structure their relationships.
Like, maybe you have a monogamous relationship, but you're open to, like, certain kinds of non-monogamy.
Okay, I see.
Or maybe you're somewhere else on that continuum entirely.
So it's really about finding what works best for each individual or couple.
Exactly.
I'm really starting to see how this whole polyamorous perspective
Yeah.
can be so valuable,
Yeah.
even if we don't personally identify as polyamorous.
Because it helps us question all those assumptions we've internalized.
Right. It's like we're finally allowed to break free from those old rules and create our own blueprint for how we want our relationships to look.
Exactly. Relationships are always changing, you know?
Right.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Right, right.
The important thing is to be honest with yourself and your partner,
Mhm.
communicate openly,
Yeah.
be willing to grow together.
This conversation has been so eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
It's amazing how we started by just questioning this one idea, monogamy.
And we ended up rethinking our whole approach to relationships.
Exactly.
That's what these deep dives are all about, right? Taking something that seems simple on the surface
Mhm.
and uncovering all those hidden layers.
Okay, so for our listener who might be feeling a bit overwhelmed right now,
Yeah.
what's the main takeaway here?
I think the most important thing to remember is that there's no one right way to do relationships, whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, or somewhere in between.
What really matters
Yeah.
is being intentional, communicative,
Yeah.
and respectful of yourself and your partners.
Exactly.
I love that. And, it's okay to question those societal norms, the ones that try to tell us how we should be in a relationship.
Like, maybe take some time to reflect on your own relationship patterns, you know?
Yeah, like, am I making conscious choices?
Are you communicating openly and honestly?
Am I actually honoring my own needs and desires?
Those are all really important questions.
They are.
And if you're feeling lost or unsure about any of it, don't be afraid to reach out for help. Okay. Talk to a trusted friend, a family member.
Yeah.
Maybe even consider therapy.
There are so many resources out there.
Exactly. There's no shame in getting support, especially when it comes to something as important as relationships.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll leave our listener with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
If thinking like a polyamorist
Mm-hmm.
can help us bring more honesty and communication into all our relationships,
Yeah.
could that actually be the key to creating deeper connections and living more fulfilling lives, regardless of how many partners we choose to have?
That's a great question.
We'll let you decide.
Happy deep diving.